In this module, we shall discuss the reasons why balanced budgets might be suboptimal. The fiscal policy or government budgets play an important role in redistributing wealth across different groups in society. This redistribution may occur across groups over time as well. The budget deficit plays a very important role in this direction. Traditionally, for the fiscal sustainability in the long run, a balanced budget is suggested. The main argument given in favor of balanced budget is that they keep interest rate lower, help increase in investment and income, giving further boost to income and thus to the capacity to save of the economy. This helps the economy grow faster over a long period of time. On the other hand, there are even stronger voices that say that having a rigid balanced budgetary policy every year may actually make the downturns more painful, as during recessions, a cut in expenditure due to fall in revenue collection would make the economy worse off. Actually, following a policy of fiscal deficit during the downturns and a fiscal surplus during the upswings will be more stabilizing than having a balanced budget in each phase. Most economists thus oppose a strict rule requiring the government to balance its budget. There are three causes why optimal fiscal policy may at times call for a budget deficit or surplus. These are stabilization, tax smoothing, and intergenerational redistribution. Hence, in this module, we will discuss these three issues one by one. After studying this module, you shall be able to understand the role of fiscal deficit and surplus in stabilization of economy. Explore why tax smoothing is needed. Understand tax smoothing under certainty. Understand tax smoothing under uncertainty. Examine the issue of intergenerational redistribution through fiscal deficits. First, we shall discuss stabilization. A budget deficit or surplus can help stabilize the economy. In essence, a balanced budget rule would cancel the automatic stabilizing powers of the system of taxes and transfers. When the economy moves into a recession, taxes automatically fall and transfers automatically rise. Although these automatic responses help stabilize the economy, they push the budget into deficit. A strict balanced budget rule would need the government to raise taxes or reduce spending in a recession. But these actions would in turn depress aggregate demand. Discretionary fiscal policy is probable to counter-cyclical. The fiscal balances move in response to both discretionary policy actions and by cyclical changes in the macroeconomic environment. During pessimistic economic environment, taxes may be cut or expenditure increased due to discretionary policy actions, resulting in worse fiscal balance. When economic activity goes down, revenues are negatively affected and spending may increase automatically. But looking solely at changes in the fiscal balance can thus be misleading, as we can separate the effect of discretionary policy changes and that of recession on fiscal deficit. This is why cyclical adjustment is required to disaggregate the impact of cyclical movements on fiscal variables and due to the changes in fiscal policy. In this perspective, let us first have the nominal values of the cyclically adjusted fiscal balance. For this purpose, the complete fiscal balance may be disintegrated as OB is equal to PB minus INT is equal to CAPB plus CPB minus INT, where OB is overall fiscal balance, PB is primary balance, INT are interest payments, CAPB is the cyclically adjusted primary balance and CPB is the cyclical primary balance. That is the part of the primary balance that automatically reacts to the cycle. Interest payments are generally kept separate because their movements are independent of the discretionary fiscal policy actions. Similarly, we can also say that the changes in the OB can be decomposed into the automatic response of fiscal variables to changes in output and the response of fiscal variables to change in discretionary policy, and then the changes in interest payments, and this can be expressed as delta OB is equal to delta CPB plus delta CAPB minus delta INT, where delta is the difference between two consecutive years T and T plus 1. Now here we can define the automatic stabilizers or as a change in cyclical primary balance, and can be expressed as AS is equal to delta CPB is equal to delta OB minus delta CAPB plus delta INT. Automatic stabilizers are one of the factors that explain changes in overall balances, that is delta OB. These stabilizers help stabilize the business cycle and are automatically triggered by the changes in the public revenue as well as expenditure. Taxes, particularly the direct taxes, are a function of income and therefore change automatically according to the cycle. During recession, with lower growth and correspondingly lower business profits or pre-tax household income, the government's tax take will be lower while disposable income and hence consumption will decline. But the marginal propensity to consume being less than 1, the decline in consumption will be less than that of the pre-tax income. This will provide an element of stability in the economy. Further, the progressive nature of the tax also has the capacity to provide an added degree of stability compared to flat income taxes. Similarly, some spending programs also react automatically to the cycle, such as unemployment benefits or other social transfers. Increase in volume when economic conditions deteriorate. Change in the cyclically adjusted primary balance can be derived from cyclically adjusted revenue and expenditure. In particular, the cyclically adjusted component of revenue, that is RCA, is defined as RCA is equal to R into YP upon Y raised to power ER, where R is the nominal primary revenue, YP is potential output, that is maximum possible output at any given time, Y is the actual output, and ER is the elasticity of revenue with respect to the output gap. This gap can be defined as gap is equal to Y minus YP upon YP. On the expenditure side, the cyclically adjusted primary expenditure can be written as GCA is equal to G, YP upon Y raised to power EG, where G is nominal primary expenditure and EG is the elasticity of expenditure with respect to the output gap. After defining the cyclically adjusted expenditure as well as revenue, we can easily find the cyclically adjusted primary balance. It can be written as CAPB is equal to R, YP upon Y raised to power ER minus G, YP upon Y raised to power EG. If revenue is unitary elastic, or say the revenues are perfectly correlated with the cycle and expenditure elasticity is equal to 0, that is expenditures are not affected by the cycle, the cyclically adjusted primary balance becomes CAPB is equal to R, YP upon Y minus G. The cyclical primary balance is therefore CPB is equal to OB minus CAPB plus INT is equal to R 1 minus YP upon Y, which is equal to R upon Y YP gap. Hence, if elasticity of spending is assumed to be 0, the cyclical primary balance depends on the level of taxation as a ratio to GDP, output gap and potential gap. Thus, with help of these methods, we are able to decompose the changes in fiscal balance due to discretionary policy changes as well as automatic effects which act as automatic stabilizers through fiscal deficits as well as surpluses. Moving on to the tax smoothing. The idea of tax smoothing was mainly propagated by Barrow 1979, who focused on government's desire to minimize the distortions associated with obtaining revenue. The distortions created by taxes are likely to increase more than proportionally with the amount of revenue raised. Barrow says that a tax has no distortion cost to first order. Thus, for low taxes, the distortion costs are approximately proportional to the scale of the amount of revenue raised. When distortions rise more than proportionately with taxes, they are on average higher under a policy of variable taxes than under one with steady taxes at the same average level. Thus, the desire to minimize distortions provides a reason for the government to smoothen the path of taxes over time. The government wants to minimize the present value of distortions from raising revenue, subject to the constraint that the present value of its revenue not be less than some level. Because there are increasing marginal distortion cost of raising revenue, the government chooses a smooth path for the taxes. A budget deficit or surplus can be used to reduce the distortion of incentives caused by the tax system. High tax rates may also impose a cost on society by discouraging economic activity. A tax on labor earnings, for instance, reduces the incentive that people have to work long hours, because this disincentive becomes particularly large at very high tax rates. The total social cost of the taxes is minimized by keeping the tax rates relatively stable rather than making them high in some years and low in others, say by following the policy of tax smoothing. To keep tax rates smooth, a deficit is necessary in years of unusually low income or say recessions, or usually high expenditures, that is during wars. Tax smoothing actually can be discussed under certainty as well as uncertainty. Tax smoothing under certainty. Following Barrow's principle that the distortion cost increases with tax rate, we can write the distortion cost function as Ct is equal to Yt, which is a function of Tt upon Yt, and F0 is equal to 0, where F dash 0 is equal to 0 and F double dash dot is greater than 0. Here Ct is the distortion cost, Tt is the tax, Yt is income, and Tt upon Yt becomes the tax rate. Above expression shows that distortions rise more proportionately with taxes relative to output. The government aims to choose the path of taxes to minimize the present value of the distortion cost, subject to the requirement that it satisfies its overall budget constraint, which is minimize T0, T1 and so on, summation T0 to infinity 1 upon r raised to power t Yt into function of Tt upon Yt, subject to summation t is equal to 0 to infinity 1 upon r raised to power t into Tt is equal to d0 plus summation t is equal to 0 to infinity into 1 upon 1 plus r into t into gt, where G stands for government purchases and R is the real interest rate. Let us assume that the government reduces the taxes in period T by a small amount delta T and increasing taxes in the next period by 1 plus R into delta T, with taxes in all other periods unchanged. This does not change the present value of revenues and hence the budget constraint is satisfied. For optimal budget policy, the marginal benefits or MB must be equal to the marginal cost or MC of change in taxes. Thus, the present value of the marginal benefits of the changes in taxes in T time period for reducing distortions is MB is equal to 1 upon 1 plus R raised to power T into Yt into F dash Tt upon Yt into 1 upon Yt into delta T, which is equal to 1 upon 1 plus r raised to power t into f dash tt upon yt into delta t. But in t plus 1 time period, the cost of increasing distortions due to increase in tax rate by 1 plus r into delta t will be mc is equal to 1 upon 1 plus r raised to power t plus 1 into yt plus 1 into f dash tt plus 1 divided by yt plus 1 into 1 upon yt plus 1 into 1 plus r to be multiplied with delta t, which is again equal to 1 upon 1 plus r raised to power t into f dash tt plus 1 yt plus 1 into delta t. As the marginal benefits and the marginal cost are to be equal, 1 plus r raised to power t into f dash tt upon yt into delta t is equal to 1 upon 1 plus r raised to power t into f dash tt plus 1 divided by yt plus 1 into delta t. That is, f dash tt upon yt is equal to f dash tt plus 1 upon yt plus 1. This requires that tt upon yt is equal to tt plus 1 divided by yt plus 1. That is, the tax rate should remain constant over time. Thus, it is only the smooth taxes that minimizes the distortion cost. Now, let us discuss tax smoothing under uncertainty. Under uncertainty, the government's problem is to minimize the expected present value of the distortions from raising revenue with a given budget constraint, that the present value of the tax revenues must equal initial debt plus the present value of the purchases. Here too, we take the same case that taxes in period T are reduced by small amount delta T and then increase it by 1 plus r into delta T in T plus 1 time period to satisfy the budget constraint. If the government is optimizing, this change does not affect the present value of the distortions, and we can say that f dash tt upon yt is equal to et into f dash tt plus 1 divided by yt plus 1, where et dot denotes expectations based on the information available in period T. Thus, there cannot be predictable changes in marginal distortion cost of obtaining revenue. Thus, tt upon yt is equal to et tt plus 1 over yt plus 1. Next, we discuss the intergenerational redistribution. In modern economies, the taxes are more known as redistributive processes. This redistribution is not merely between the richer and the poor classes at a given point of time, but is also between the generations. The examples of such intergenerational redistribution include expenditures for healthcare and the payments to the retired, or even spending for welfare, education or other human capital formation to the lower economic classes. The redistributive hypothesis explains budget deficits as a decision to tax future generations. Kuckerman and Melzer, 1989, show that in a growing economy, those who would like to leave negative bequests to future generations for their current benefits always vote for deficits. Although a majority does not always prefer deficits, but the number of those who favor deficit spending rises with the spread of the distribution of income in their favor, the variability of income and other factors. It is generally blamed that the myopic pressure groups force the government to adopt a policy that lower taxes and higher debt burden. This leaves higher disposable income to the present generation, but transfer the burden of debt in terms of higher taxes to future generations. However, there are equally strong views which say that the mechanisms that removes the effect of debt is intergenerational transfer. An increase in debt today to finance tax reduction is offset by higher savings at higher disposable income. The current generation leaves to its descendants both more debt and more wealth with which to service or pay the debt. The net effect is zero on both current and future generations. Negative saving caused by increasing the government budget is fully offset by higher private saving, and conversely, so that saving remains unchanged. There are some other arguments in favor of such redistributions, such as if the current generation fights a war to preserve freedom, future generations benefit as well and should bear some of the burden. To pass on some of the war's cost, the current generation can finance the war with a budget deficit. The government can later retire the debt by levying taxes on the next generation. These considerations lead most economists to reject a strict balanced budget rule. At the very least, A rule for fiscal policy needs to take account of recurring episodes such as recessions and wars, during which it is reasonable for the government to run a budget deficit. A model by Alex Kuckerman and Alan Meltzer in 1989 is important to analyze income transfers across groups and across generations. They introduce the political structure of a representative democracy to derive collective choices to show that debt neutrality may not always exist and fiscal deficits do have real effects on the economy. This model also implies that debt will be larger the greater the spread of the wealth distributions across individuals. It states that the fiscal deficits will be greater the more unequal the distribution of income and the greater the number of the individuals who are at the lower tail of the distribution. It emphasizes that if feasible, the forces that lead to the state to redistribute income across different groups at any point of time will also lead it to transfer wealth across generations through debt financing of the expenditures. More generally, if we do not live in a Ricardian world, that is, the Ricardian equivalence does not operate, then deficits can be used by individuals as an institutional vehicle for the redistribution of wealth across generations. We can discuss here two possibilities. One, when the present generation do not leave any bequest for its future generations, and second, when they leave a positive bequest. If there is no bequest, deficits per capita can be viewed as the increment to tax liabilities imposed on the average member of a future generation. On the other hand, if the bequests are left, the Ricardian equivalence may hold true, and the deficit per capita can be viewed as the average size of the bequest each individual of the current generation must leave annually for future generations. In other words, we can say that if bequests are not operative, the deficits in the current period measured as a percentage of GNP can represent the average tax rate on future generations, and if the bequests are fully operative, they represent the average size of the bequest rate of the current generation. In effect, deficits as a percentage of GNP establish the bounds on the lump sum average tax or bequest rate required to finance or offset the deficit when population growth is equal to the interest rate on the debt. Thus, the deficits provide a vehicle for the intergenerational redistribution of wealth. In effect, when the current generation votes to redistribute income from some of their members to others of the same generation by increasing taxes, they will also seek to expand the tax base by relying on the wealth of future generations and increase the size of the deficit. In this way, redistribution across groups and across generations should be positively correlated. On the other hand, if Ricardian equivalence holds, then rational individuals know that deficit financing is an ineffective tool for achieving the desired intergenerational transfer of wealth, and therefore they must resort to taxing the wealth of the current generation, since that is the only feasible tax base. Let us now summarize what we have learnt in this module. The traditional view of public finance actually see it in terms of private finance, only where the expenditures must be equal to the incomes, and if there are any deficits at any point of time, then these should be wiped out as soon as possible. Such policies are favored for long-term fiscal sustainability. There are several arguments that say that leading the economy on a smooth growth path, a balanced budget is the best policy. But most economists go against a rigid policy of balanced budget. According to them, following the policy of balanced budget during the business cycles is always suboptimal and turns the process of slowing down or heating up of the economy more painful. Therefore, following the policies of fiscal deficits or fiscal surpluses is more appropriate policy during the downturns and upswings of the business cycles. Moreover, raising the tax rate to deal with the growing expenditure in order to have a balanced budget may not be a wise policy, as it may increase the cost of distortions which have a tendency to increase with increase in tax rates. Finally, it has also been felt that the fiscal deficits play an important role in intergenerational redistribution. It is being felt that if the current generation does not leave any bequests for the future generations, the deficits in the current period measured as percentage of GNP can represent the average tax rate on future generations. And if the bequests are fully operated, they represent the average size of the bequest rate of the current generation.